Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer. Savannah is off this morning. Right now on Morning News Now, COVID for Christmas? Another setback nearly 2 years into the pandemic. New cases in the U.S. soaring to levels not seen since last winter. Now fears growing that the highly contagious Omicron variant may have been an unwanted guest at all those holiday gatherings.
We've obviously got to do better. I mean, I think things will improve greatly as we get into January, but that doesn't help us today and tomorrow.
We have team coverage from some of the areas hardest hit with a warning from experts in what you can do now to help stop the spread ahead of the new year. Canceled. Tens of thousands of Americans' holiday travel plans interrupted as flight crews fall victim to that new wave of COVID. We'll have the latest as airlines scramble to recover from hundreds of canceled flights, plus how to get compensated if your flight was impacted. Attacking Alzheimer's, the White House set to unveil a new plan to combat a debilitating disease. Exclusive information from the Secretary of Health and Human Services on the aggressive strategy and why this plan is so personal to him. And a year to remember. 2021 had plenty of ups and downs for all of us. We're going to take a look back at some of the most memorable headlines of the year, good and bad, plus a look ahead at what's in store for 2022. Good to have you with us. Hope you had a happy holiday weekend. We do want to begin with the surge of the Omicron coronavirus variant as cases surged to the highest point in nearly a year. In the past week, while Americans started gathering for the holidays, we had days when more than 200,000 people tested positive. Now, the last time we saw numbers that high was in January 2021. Like the case numbers, the demand for testing is also reaching new heights. Thousands of Americans fresh off holiday celebrations are now waiting in line or hunting for tests to see if they're infected. Adding to the holiday stress, getting home is becoming a nightmare for thousands of travelers. Just in the past few days, thousands of flights nationwide have been canceled because flight crews are testing positive for the virus. This comes as the nation's top infectious disease expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci, warns people not to become complacent with Omicron, even if the cases are mild. That's because more people are being admitted to the hospital with COVID, an average of nearly 8,000 people every day. We have a team breaking down every angle of the Omicron surge, from testing to travel, and what doctors are learning about this new variant. Let's begin with NBC News correspondent Ellison Barber in New York City and NBC reporter Gary Grumbach in New Jersey, two of the hardest hit states right now. Ellison, New York State reported its highest new case total ever on Christmas Eve. More than 49,000 people testing positive in that 24-hour period. So what is the situation with Omicron in the city right now? How are they meeting the demand for testing?
Hey, Joe, yeah, cases continue to rise, and it seems like that they are not going to be dropping in the near future. New York's positivity rate right now is 14%. But when you look at hospitalizations and death, it is nowhere near the numbers that New York saw during peaks pre-vaccine. The governor in this state is trying to remind people to focus on those numbers. Listen.
As we knew the numbers would continue to climb, we foresaw this. This is not a surprise, and this is a very, very contagious variant. And I will repeat this once again. This is not the same situation we had in March of 2020 or even last winter's surge.
When it comes to testing, that's been a bit of a mess, to say the least, in New York City. We have seen lines that go for blocks and blocks, people waiting in the cold, sometimes for hours, just to get a COVID test. When it comes to the over-the-counter at-home rapid kits that are typically available at pharmacies or grocery stores in the city, those seem to leave the shelves as soon as they are restocked. So to try and help with some of that, the state is opening pop-up vaccine sites inside of subways. Two of those, one here in Times Square and another at Grand Central, open today. 5 additional pop-up sites at subways. Those are set to open next week. Joe?
Something tells me the demand for testing going to be just as great in this week following all those holiday gatherings. Let's go across the river to New Jersey, where you are, Gary. New Jersey seeing a 163% increase in cases just over the past 2 weeks. So what's the state doing in response to their surge?
Hey there, Joe. Yeah, we've seen thousands and tens of thousands of cases here in New Jersey. More cases this weekend than we saw throughout the entire pandemic in terms of a daily average. And usually when we see cases rising, we're seeing hospitalizations rising as well. And we are seeing that in the state of New Jersey, but not nearly at the rate of last December. We're seeing about 2,500 people hospitalized in the state of New Jersey. Most of them are unvaccinated. Hospitals say they have surge plans ready if they need them. They don't need them right now. Governor Murphy has made himself very clear. He does not want the state to go back into another lockdown like we saw during the spring of 2020. So as a result of that, localities and local communities are really taking matters into their own hands. The city of Newark is instituting a vaccine mandate for restaurants, bars, and entertainment and sporting venues across the city. The cities of Montclair and South Orange are instituting indoor mask mandates as well. And Governor Murphy, of course, is involved with this every step of the way. Today, he'll be on a phone call with President Biden about how COVID is handling, and all the governors are handling COVID from state to state. But he'll be taking that call from Costa Rica, where he's on vacation with his family. Joe?
All right, Ellison, vaccines are a huge part of this. New vaccine mandates now go into effect for New York City today. What are these new rules? How are they going to work?
So one mandate expands the existing vaccine mandate to private companies. So what does that mean? Any non-governmental entity who employs at least one worker in New York City will now be required to obtain proof of vaccination from their employees starting today. If they fail to do that, they could face fines starting at $1,000. Another mandate going into effect today in New York City has to do with kids. In New York City now, anyone over the age of 12, they are required to show proof of vaccination to dine indoors, go to a gym, or any indoor entertainment venue. That mandate having to do with children is highly controversial. Mayor Bill de Blasio says that both of these are bold, first-in-the-nation measures and necessary to keep New Yorkers and their communities safe. But Mayor Bill de Blasio only has a few more days left in office. The incoming mayor-elect Eric Adams, has said that he is weighing in and he is going to review, these mandates as his administration comes in. Mayor Bill de Blasio's administration, his legal team, they have said they expect legal challenges to this, but they believe that it will hold up in court. Mayor Bill de Blasio switches out, leaves office. The new mayor comes in on January 1st. Joe?
Ellison mentioned kids. Gary, let's stick with the kids theme here. School districts now figuring out what to do once students return in January. Quickly here, how are school leaders in Jersey handling this?
Yeah, Governor Murphy has said he does not want everyone to go back to all virtual learning. He says it's not good for the students, it's not good for the teachers, it's not good for the parents, it's not good for anybody. So it's really being done on a case-by-case basis. Some schools, what they're doing is starting virtual for the first few weeks of January once kids get back from their holiday break, just to get until the spike sort of subsides here. And then they hope to be going back into all in-person learning. But other schools are instituting vaccine mandates, booster mandates, just so people are a little bit more safer in the classroom. But right now, school administrators are just crossing their fingers they can get back in person in the spring semester.
A lot of parents are doing the same. Ellison, Gary, thanks for kicking us off this morning. Let's bring in NBC News medical contributor Dr. Kavita Patel. Dr. Patel, good to have you with us. You know, so many families had to change their plans this past weekend and last week because of positive COVID cases. Remind us, what makes Omicron so contagious, especially compared with previous strains?
Yeah, Joe, good morning. Briefly, Omicron is able to replicate faster, and that means that you're able to give it to more people. And we do believe that the mutations, a number of mutations, over 30 of them, allow for that spike protein to attach in a much more efficient manner to the linings of your upper respiratory tract.
Okay, so despite evidence that shows Omicron has milder symptoms, Dr. Fauci is still warning that doesn't mean we can let our guard down, especially those who are unvaccinated. Here's more of what he said.
Those are the most vulnerable ones when you have a virus that is extraordinarily effective in getting to people and infecting them the way Omicron is. So even though we're pleased by the evidence from multiple countries that it looks like there is a lesser degree of severity, we've got to be careful that we don't get complacent about that.
If Omicron cases are mild for most of the vaccinated and boosted folks, do we have an idea yet of what the variant looks like for those who are unvaccinated?
Yeah, Joe, it really does present a bit differently than previous strains. It causes what we call a bronchitis. It's not that deep settling pneumonia. People on the ventilators feeling that shortness of breath. They're really having cough, and a productive cough where it just kind of gets you tired. And a lot of us have experienced that. But with Omicron, it's more pronounced. And in an unvaccinated person, it can cause them to not only need to be hospitalized, but Joe, it can be deadly. And I want to remind people, even in vaccinated individuals, if you have chronic conditions, that can also make you more susceptible.
Dr. Patel, we just heard from Gary talking about how schools are responding to Omicron. Right now, do you think it's safe for kids to return to the classroom in January? If so, what are the steps that schools should take?
I do think it's safe, providing a couple of conditions. Number one, that there is some mechanism to make sure that students have some ability to get tested, because we know it can spread quickly, fast, and it can be asymptomatic. Number two, a way to make sure that any eligible adults or children are vaccinated. That's going to ensure everyone around, even in households, Joe, are safe. Number three, air filtration and masking. I know that we're tired of it, but masks can especially make a difference with Omicron, because it can take just days to infect a number of people, as we've been seeing over the Christmas holidays.
Dr. Kavita Patel, good to see you on this Monday morning. Thank you so much. Now, this morning, the surge in coronavirus cases is creating a travel nightmare across the country. More than 1,000 flights were canceled over the holiday weekend. Airlines cited staffing shortages from employees exposed to or infected with COVID. And for many flyers, relief could still be days away. NBC News correspondent Kerry Sanders explains.
Well, good morning. If you're flying today, expect delays. The day after Christmas, we had more than 1,000 flights delayed or canceled. Now, all this is related to the fact that employees of airlines are getting tested for coronavirus, and they're getting positive results. So there are fewer employees, which is impacting the flight crews, the ground crews, meaning that some flights just have to be canceled. Now, the airlines have requested the CDC to recalculate its recommended time in quarantine. Right now, employees need to be quarantined for 10 days, but that's having a compounding effect on the airline schedules. And of course, we're back to levels where people are traveling significantly. So if you're traveling today, we're beginning to see the numbers climb already with the delays and the cancellations. So a couple pieces of advice. First of all, make sure you call the airline before you go to the airport to see what's going on with your flight, and then check again online before you leave wherever you are to go to the airport to see if maybe things have changed again. And then finally, expect that there will be a delay and you may be stuck where you are. If you can work from home or work from wherever you are, that's good. But if you're trying to rush back today to get to work, it's a good chance you may have to call your boss and say, not going to happen. Back to you.
Gary, thank you so much. Now, for more on these flight cancellations, let's bring in Melanie Lieberman, senior editor at The Points Guy. Melanie, good morning. You know, we just heard from Kerry there. There's going to be more delays and cancellations for flights today. He offered a few tips. What would you tell Americans who are preparing to fly either this morning or even later on this week?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that travelers need to keep in mind is that patience and flexibility have never been more important because there is so much uncertainty. We are still seeing cancellations, delays, and these things tend to have a trickle-down effect. So when we have early on cancellations, that's going to continue in the hours and the days to come. So the most important thing is to be proactive. If you have somewhere to go, you should already be looking at what your alternative options are just in case your trip is disrupted. That's really the single best thing a traveler can do right now.
So, Melanie, what advice do you have for people who are currently stuck at an airport? NBC News now does air at several airports. They're waiting for a new flight. Is there any way they can maximize the compensation they get from their airline because of these delays?
Absolutely. Travelers who have their flights canceled are entitled to a refund. You should absolutely push for that. Having a travel voucher is not as good as having a full refund in the form of your original payment. So absolutely hold your ground when it comes to getting a full refund. If you are currently at the airport, your flight is canceled or delayed, and you're trying to figure out what to do next, the best thing to do is to be looking at what your options are for other flights. Ask the airline if they will work with you to help get you on the next flight, even if it's with a different airline. It never hurts to ask. Travelers can also be thinking about whether or not they want to be accommodated at a hotel or have other forms of compensation wrapped up in that. So the best thing to do is to understand what you want. And of course, go through that with patience and kindness, because everybody is working to get home as fast as possible. But knowing exactly what you want, what your ideal scenario is in terms of being compensated or rebooked is important.
Kindness, always important, even though it can be frustrating. Melanie, do you have any advice for travel alternatives in case these flight cancellations continue? Someone says, hey, I can't wait days, and that's how long it's going to take. Are there other ways that people can get around?
Absolutely. Depending on where you're located, taking a train is certainly a great option if your flight is severely delayed or has been canceled, particularly, again, because getting rebooked could take a while. So we want travelers to be thinking about, can I rent a car and get where I need to go? Can I hop on a train? Can I fly into a different area airport and take a train from there or a car from there? So these are all solutions travelers should be thinking about if their plans have been upended by this spate of cancellations and delays we're seeing.
Good to know there are options during these tough times. Melanie Lieberman with The Points Guy, thanks so much for your advice. We appreciate it. In other news, the juries in two big trials will resume deliberations this morning after struggling to reach verdicts before the holiday break. In New York, Ghislaine Maxwell is facing 6 federal charges, including sex trafficking of a minor. Well, in San Jose, California, Elizabeth Holmes, founder of Theranos, is facing 9 counts of wire fraud. We're covering the latest in both very different trials with NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos and senior business reporter Ben Popkin. Good morning to both of you. Danny, let's start with you and the Maxwell trial. Before the jury was sent home on Wednesday, before the holiday break, jurors did request transcripts of some of the testimony that they had heard. What testimony did they request, and does that suggest anything to you about the deliberations?
It's a good sign that jurors are requesting transcripts because it means they're poring over the scripts to find out whether or not there's inconsistent testimony. If somebody is saying something that just doesn't sit right with them. And the jurors are instructed, if you find someone to be not credible on one point, you can conclude that they're not credible at all on all points. So this is a good sign, generally speaking, in deliberations, that jurors are taking their job seriously and not just wandering back into the jury room and saying, did we believe her or him, or did we not?
Ben, let's bring you in here. You've been following the Elizabeth Holmes trial very closely. On Thursday, the last day of deliberations before their break, the jury asked to hear some audio again of Holmes on a call with investors. Tell us about that piece of evidence, why it's so important for this case.
Good morning, Joe. The trial of the failed former blood testing startup founder really hinges on intent to benefit herself. Did Holmes make statements to investors that she knew to be false? So this secret recording made by investors who are frustrated about getting financial info from Holmes provides a clear window into the past. They heard 10 clips from a 2013 recording she made on a call with investors as she made lofty claims about the company's capabilities and fundraising, claiming the company would scale, giving investors multiple returns. She said it could run any lab test on a drop of blood, even though the machines were so buggy they could never do more than a dozen and had to do vain arm draws on other companies' machines. And she spoke about the work the company was doing with the military, even though it was never deployed. So we've heard from 29 witnesses, seen emails, PowerPoints, text messages, seen her quotes and articles. But this is Holmes speaking unguardedly, making those allegedly misleading statements in real time. It's a powerful piece of evidence. Here's her making those statements. But you can also argue in some of those cases, if you analyze the words, she's walking right up to that line of deception. So it could really cut for both either the prosecution or defense in the jury's minds. We'll be watching.
Danny, clearly these are two very different trials, but in both cases, something in common. The juries appear to be having difficulty reaching verdicts. As a defense attorney, what are your thoughts now that we're days into deliberations on both?
Not only are these unusual for that reason, these are unusual because we have 2 female defendants and a third in the form of Kim Potter just last week. This is pretty rare in the criminal justice system, and you have defendants in several cases who took the stand and testified. So we're not likely to see trials like this again in the future. But sometimes juries have difficulty deliberating. Even the most complex cases, though, really only take, generally speaking, a couple days. So is this a sign of a possible deadlock? I don't think we're quite there yet. If it looks like that's possible, the judge will give what's called an Allen charge that basically tells them, you know, you're no better than any other jury. Get back in there and reach a verdict. Defense attorneys like me don't like the Allen charge because we believe, generally speaking, that it forces holdout jurors to say, well, I was for acquittal. I guess I'll give in to the majority. Now, that, of course, is just part of the astrology of us on the outside trying to figure out what's going on the inside of jury deliberation.
Ben, as the Holmes trial picks back up for week 2 of deliberations, what should we be looking out for?
Well, the jury has been deliberating for 22 hours. They've had 3 months of technical testimony to go through. They've been extremely hard to read during the trial. They didn't show emotion, physical reactions, but they were extremely attentive, alert, taking notes. This investor call that we mentioned earlier, that was the second request from the jury. The first was whether they could take the jury instructions home to review them. The answer was no. So until we have a verdict, we'll be watching this attentive, detail-oriented jury, see if there's any more jury questions that give an insight into their process. In the meantime, we'll be left to try to decipher Holmes's body language in the courtroom as she reacts to these jury instructions. When she listened to the audio of herself making those claims in that investor call, she was blinking a lot and glancing at the jury. Make of that what you will. And until then, we're all just waiting for a verdict.
Ben Popkin, Danny Savalas, we know you'll be keeping close eyes on these today and perhaps throughout this week. Thanks so much. The Texas lawyer who argued and won the landmark Roe v. Wade abortion rights case before the Supreme Court has died. Sarah Weddington was just 26 years old when she first challenged the Texas abortion law in the Supreme Court before it was ultimately overturned in 1973. She went on to serve as a Texas state lawmaker, reforming sexual abuse laws and helping provide protections for rape victims. She also served as an advisor on women's issues to former President Jimmy Carter. Weddington was 76 years old. Let's get a check now on your morning news now weather, and a powerful storm brought a white Christmas, at least out west. NBC News meteorologist Michelle Grossman joins us with more on that. Michelle, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. Yeah, very white Christmas. Some spots saw 10 feet of snow. We're going to tack on about 3 more feet of snow. So let's take a look at that snow in the Sierras because, you know what, it was rough. They had a lot of snow over the past 48 hours. And again, we were measuring it in feet. It made for very difficult travel and will continue to make for very difficult travel over the next several days. All right, let's take a look at the alerts that are in place because they're stretched pretty much all over the west into the northern plains and even into the northeast. We're seeing some winter alerts this morning, but in the west, we're seeing some pinks and blues and whites, and that's indicating some heavier snow is possible in your warning areas. 43 million people impacted today and tomorrow by this. The northern plains, you see some winter storm warnings as well, and then the northeast, we could see a mixture of rain and snow in some spots. Here is the setup in the west. We're going to see that wet pattern continuing. It's a relentless pattern, storm after storm after storm. So again, heavy snow today in the Sierras, difficult and impossible to travel. We saw that video just a second ago, and we could tack on 3 feet of snow in some spots. That's where you see that pink coloring. That's the highest mountains, elevations of the mountains. Northern plains also, we're looking at some snow, lighter compared to the west, but we could see a half a foot of snow in some spots as we head towards Tuesday. Now, this is a big story, too. We have extremes. We have summer-like weather in the southern and plains in the southeast, and then frigid weather in the northern plains. So while in Dallas today, it's going to be 78 degrees, 23 degrees above normal, 75 in Memphis. And then Cody, we're looking at 14 degrees, Bismarck just 8 degrees. And by tomorrow, we're going to keep this pattern in place. So still really warm with temperatures in the 70s, and then just feels like 3 below in parts of the northern plains. And this will continue into the late week. So 6 degrees in Minneapolis on Wednesday and temperatures in the teens Thursday and Friday. Joe?
Welcome back. South Africa is holding a week of events to mark the death of the anti-apartheid leader Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who died yesterday at the age of 90. Tributes for the spiritual and civil rights leader are pouring in from all over the world. NBC News foreign correspondent Molly Hunter has more on his life and legacy. Molly, good morning.
Joe, good morning. The world has lost an extraordinary advocate for justice, a cleric, a Nobel Peace Prize winner, and to those who knew him and interacted with him, a man with a great sense of humor and a cackling laugh.
This morning, bells ringing out for 10 minutes in Cape Town, honoring Archbishop Desmond Tutu, as powerful tributes come in from around the world for one of the fiercest opponents of apartheid.
Black and white together!
From his daughter, "My dad is at rest. Thank you, Tsetsi, for all you have been to our family and the world." To global leaders, President Biden calling him a true servant of God and of the people, adding his legacy transcends borders and will echo throughout the ages. President Obama, who awarded Tutu the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2009, tweeting he was grounded in the struggle for liberation and justice in his own country, but also concerned with injustice everywhere. The Queen adding he was held in such high affection and esteem across the Commonwealth. And Harry and Meghan, who brought their son Archie to South Africa 2 years ago, writing he will be remembered for his optimism, his moral clarity, and his joyful spirit. Tutu was born into poverty in a small mining town in 1931, and by 1975 he became the first black Anglican dean of Johannesburg.
Extraordinary capacity to communicate with black South Africans, and also to get under the skin of white South Africans.
Resistance to South Africa's apartheid regime was met with brutal violence. Hundreds of activists, including Nelson Mandela, spent decades in prison.
The system of this country is evil.
In 1984, he won the Nobel Peace Prize, and by 1986, he became South Africa's first black archbishop. Finally, the early 1990s saw the end of apartheid.
Nothing will, I think, ever take away the glow of that first experience of walking tall.
Tutu was diagnosed with prostate cancer in the late 1990s, and at 80 years old, retired from public life to spend more time with his family. He died over the weekend in Cape Town, South Africa. He was 90 years old.
Now, tributes coming from all over the globe, as you might imagine, Joe. But in South Africa, there will be a full week of events on Wednesday, a memorial service on Thursday night, an intimate night with the friends of the Tutus. On Friday, he will lie in state for 2 days before his funeral service on Saturday. And, Joe, huge crowds are expected to come out.
I'm sure. So much good to remember. Molly, thank you so much. Let's take a look at what else is making news around the world this morning. NBC's Raph Sanchez joins us from Tel Aviv. Raph, good morning to you.
Joe, good morning. France is seeing its highest ever COVID numbers with more than 100,000 positive cases in a single day. According to health authorities, more than 1% of the entire population of Paris tested positive in the last week. Hospitalizations have also doubled over the last month, all of which is making it harder for French authorities to avoid a new lockdown. In Brazil, at least 18 people have been killed and around 300 injured in serious flooding. Nearly 40 cities throughout the country's northeast have been hit by the floods, and more than 35,000 people have been forced out of their homes. The local governor is calling it a massive tragedy. And finally to Russia, where the jolly older fellow in the red suit is known as Father Frost. Hundreds of people in Father Frost outfits took part in a traditional race in St. Petersburg yesterday. Participants are allowed to run, walk, or dance their way through the 3-mile course. Joe, it all looks pretty cold to me, but I know you're from Minnesota, so this might be your idea of a good time.
You know, I can tell you people who live in cold climates do like to flaunt it. It might not be my idea of a good time, but I know several people who would enjoy that. All right, Raph, thanks so much. Appreciate it. Now to an NBC News exclusive. We have details on the White House's new national plan for tackling Alzheimer's and dementia. And in discussing the plan, the Secretary of Health and Human Services also revealed something about his family, which he had not spoken about on camera before. MSNBC's Richard Louie has the story.
Good morning to you, Joe. Yeah, out today, the government's plan to battle Alzheimer's. In our exclusive, we got a sneak peek of the Biden administration's first update to that plan. The secretary sitting down with us to discuss new details while revealing why Alzheimer's and caregiving is so personal to him. Javier Becerra runs the agency overseeing the FDA, CDC, NIH, and more. And this holiday season, an important reminder for families takes center stage.
Probably the best way to discuss this issue, dementia, Alzheimer's, today is to talk about the family members who are right now alone because of COVID.
Alzheimer's costs America more than $355 billion annually. 70% of that cost is paid for by families.
Everyone should be able to care for their loved one if they're willing to. My mother-in-law, who did suffer from dementia for many years, never was a day without a family member at her side. My father, who passed on New Year's Day 2020, and we, the family, became his caregivers, his hospice caregivers for much of his life. He lived with me his last 4 years of life.
Becerra moved his parents next door to help. He became one of 53 million Americans taking care of a loved one living with a disability.
When he started to decline, we would sleep in his bedroom with him. You know, those are tough days. You don't get a lot of sleep. You do things for your aged parent that your parent did for you when you were an infant.
I go through that battle now. I'm fighting with my siblings about how to pay to keep my father under the care he needs, my mom at home. How does the plan address that?
Well, the plan, which is updated every year.
The government plan on Alzheimer's and dementia tracks 5 goals. And this year, a 6th new goal was added, funding new research on what behaviors might cause Alzheimer's or dementia.
Can I make sure that the diet that my parents have is healthier so that they're eating less risky foods? Absolutely. Can that help us when it comes to something like dementia? Well, that could help reduce the risk.
And that risk is higher for certain groups. In Black and Latino communities, the rate of Alzheimer's can be twice of others.
You and I grew up in poverty, essentially. When you think about health equity and this plan, bring those two together for me briefly.
In racial and ethnic minority communities, dementia hits hard and more often in some cases.
Most ambitious of the plan, to prevent and treat Alzheimer's disease within 3 years.
What is inspiring, one thing that your father said to you in your years growing up?
If you can get up and go to work, it's a good day. There was a man who really impacted my life, who makes it possible for me to jump high, to get up in the morning and have a good day. And so I won't forget my dad.
And Joe, one side note, each new year does mark the anniversary of Becerra's father's passing. The secretary telling me he takes solace, though, that he can now care for his mother and be there for her as they share the occasional bittersweetness of the holidays. Joe, again, the new updated plan, which also addresses the mental health of people living with Alzheimer's and their caregivers, that plan releasing today.
All right, Richard Louie, thanks so much for that report. Appreciate it. Fans of space exploration got the best Christmas present they could have asked for on Saturday. That's because NASA successfully launched the James Webb Telescope into space on Christmas morning. The telescope is the world's largest and most powerful telescope built to date, and it's designed to study the early days of the universe. Now, it's scheduled to complete a course correction burn today, adjusting its trajectory so that it's in perfect position while making its way toward its observing spot. And where is that, you might ask? Well, it's nearly 1 million miles away from Earth. All right, we're taking a look back at some of the biggest stories that made headlines this year. From COVID surges to supply chain shortages, 2021 brought us unexpected twists and turns that changed all our lives. Let's bring in editor-in-chief of The Skim, Niven McCall-Maza, for more on these top stories. Good to have you with us, Niven. So the coronavirus once again dominated headlines this year. It is dominating them at the end of the year, certainly. Remind us of some of the biggest moments in our fight against COVID and an important focus, which is the mental health fallout for healthcare workers and for so many others.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride of a year. It's crazy to think that it started with a pretty turbulent final month of President Trump's administration with the January 6th insurrection, and is now ending with what feels like a very unwelcome deja vu, with Omicron really having cases and COVID rising again. COVID is something that's continued to be the big story of this year. I think the difference between last year and this year is that there was so much unknown last year, and the thought of vaccines was really the light at the end of the tunnel. And I think this year we saw it's not that black and white. You know, vaccines are something that are still There are a lot of people that are really hesitant to still get them, and whether that be because of misinformation or our long history of systemic racism in our healthcare system, or just an overall distrust of the vaccine process and the rollout. It's an issue that healthcare workers are trying to figure out how to have our country reach herd immunity with part of our population not vaccinated. But on the other side of it, those that are vaccinated are seeing, lower hospitalization rates, lower death rates, and those are all things that we expected. And so while it might not be this, we got the vaccine and the pandemic is over, I think what we're looking at for 2022 is trying to figure out, when are we reaching a stage where this becomes our normal? We are a bit used to kind of waves as we are with the flu. And we understand that there are going to be spikes like there are with flu season. And we may all have to get boosters every couple of months, but it doesn't disrupt our day-to-day like it is currently.
Folks are realizing this wasn't a light switch now that was just going to turn off very quickly. Let's talk about some of the biggest money headlines of 2021. That included the economic recovery and some surprising new investment options, which were always making headlines. What kind of recovery are we looking at in 2022? Can we expect to see similar finance trends moving forward?
I think we will. I think that, this year the government really was trying to step in to help with relief. And we saw, they came in with extra unemployment benefits, or pausing evictions and student loan debt. And I think, one of the big things was keeping interest rates low. And the Fed has already indicated that they are going to increase interest rates probably multiple times next year. And so I think this was a year of really trying to stabilize the economy, considering the amount of unemployment that we were seeing last year. But I think, what that also causes, as you mentioned earlier, is supply chain shortages. And also, we saw inflation, the highest we've seen really since the 80s. And so I think a key thing that people dealt with this year was a really, really hot housing market that really pushed out first-time home buyers. I think they will have a likelier chance at getting into the market next year. But with higher interest rates, there's also a give and take of what you can afford. I think in terms of, crazes and new trends, we saw cryptocurrency really take off this year. And I think next year, I think people are really going to be looking to see, is this something that sticks around? I think there's a lot of interest there. There's a lot of reasons for it, but there's also some real negatives when it comes to the environment and how risky it is. So I think people are going to be looking to places like El Salvador, which is the first country that really adopted Bitcoin as its national currency, to see, is this a valid thing? Can this work?
And for some of us, still some confusion about it as well. Right. Niven McCall-Maza, thanks so much for joining us. We really do appreciate it. Have a good one. With Christmas now behind us, you might be going through all the stuff Santa brought you and figuring out whether to return any gifts that missed the mark. NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster joins us now from a warehouse outside Indianapolis, where some of those returned gifts will end up. Shaq, good morning to you. So the days after Christmas are always busy for returns, obviously. With the rise of e-commerce, that's expected to be especially true this year. Give us a sense of the volume and how it might be different from previous holiday seasons.
Well, they're expecting a lot more returns this year, Joe. And, not to say that we're not grateful for the gifts that we got over the holiday break, but 2 out of every 3 of us plan to make a return this holiday season. And many of those returns don't end up on the store shelves. Instead, they end up in places like this. I want you to just look around here just so you get a sense of the volume here. You're looking at more than 6,000 pallets of items here. You see bicycles, grills, things that people purchased but are now sending back, not going back to the store shelves, but instead they're being resold to third parties. And, they're being helped by companies like B-Stock. And we spoke to their CEO about a week ago about the volume they're expecting this time around. Listen to what he told us about why that is.
We see for this season that volume is going to increase again, and a big part of that is going to be, e-commerce shopping, and the continued shift for folks to buying online is going to result in some increases in customer returns. by and large, we see about 50 to 60% of merchandise going back on the shelves, provided it's in, brand new condition. But the bulk of that, the rest of that, the 40 or 50% that they don't put back on the shelf, tends to go through a business platform like Bstock.
That was actually their chief operating officer. Now, he says they're expecting a tsunami of returns this year. You mentioned because so many people are doing that online shopping more than going in store, another effect of this pandemic.
I have to say, I don't think I have a single return to make this year. So good job, friends and family. Now, for those who do need that return, many companies, I know. Many companies do offer free returns. Nothing's free in life. So who really foots the bill for these services?
That's right. Nothing is ever really free, especially in retail, and especially when these returns are costing the companies 7% more this year alone. As you know, it likely goes down to the consumers. Listen to a little bit of why we heard that breakdown.
The consumer pays the price for a free return. The consumer pays the price for free shipping. There is nothing in this world, not even death or taxes, that really is free any longer. And so when a consumer takes advantage of free shipping, that cost, which is not free, has to be borne somewhere. And the only somewhere in a retail setting is in the price of the goods.
The reasoning experts say an increased labor costs, increased transportation costs, and the higher price of storing all of these returns that are expected to flow in.
All right, Shaq, wishing you very few returns as well. Thanks so much, my friend. Good to see you. Time now for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you. Silvana Henao is with us this morning. Silvana, good morning.
Hey, good morning and happy Monday. Retail sales rising 8.5% this holiday season, according to a report by MasterCard Spending Pulse. That's the fastest pace in 17 years, even as shoppers dealt with higher prices, product shortages, and the Omicron variant. Online sales rising 11%, accounting for more than 20% of all sales. The results were fueled by purchases of clothing and jewelry. MasterCard says consumers were eager to get their gift shopping done early. Meanwhile, Microsoft is canceling its in-person presence at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas next week on worries about the Omicron variant. On Friday, Microsoft said it will still take part, but remotely. General Motors, Google, Twitter, Amazon, and others have also canceled their physical presence at the show. CES officials say the event will still be held with strong safety measures in place. And supply chain shortages have affected nearly every industry. Now, as the number of COVID cases is rising nationwide, we may be experiencing a shortage of disposable face masks. One U.S. manufacturer saying a big reason is the need for masks hasn't been consistent throughout the pandemic. He says people buy up more each time there's a flare-up in COVID cases, and that's true now with the Omicron variant. The CDC says there are still some options for those without a disposable mask, including cloth face coverings and the KN95 masks. Back to you.
All right. Silvana, thanks so much, and happy Monday to you as well. 2021 was another tough year for movie theaters. They struggled with shutdowns, restrictions, and, of course, the boom in streaming. But we might be on the edge of a resurgence. This weekend, the new Spider-Man film became the first of the pandemic era to make $1 billion globally at the box office. NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson has more.
Just like how it happens on screen, the movie theater biz needed a hero to swoop in when all seemed lost. Theater operators hope Spider-Man's big box office holiday swing may have saved the day.
This could be the savior of the industry and could mark a really important turning point in this road to recovery for that big screen experience around the world. It's a big deal.
The industry needed this. 88% of theaters are now open and operating compared to pre-pandemic levels. In an era of COVID fears and widespread lockdowns, audiences traded crowded theaters for the couch.
Back in 2020, COVID plummeted the U.S. box office to about $2 billion. The year before was $11 billion. This year, it shot back up to $4 billion, and theater operators are hopeful that's a promising sign of some return to normalcy.
But the pandemic also pushed a new foe to the forefront, streaming.
Please, don't say 100%.
facing incredible losses.
Time to fly.
Studios made blockbusters like The Matrix Resurrections available to watch day and date at home alongside the theater. Mookie Greidinger is CEO of the U.S.'s second largest theater chain.
The premiere of a big movie should be in the cinemas.
Most studios will go back to theater first, but the release window before a movie hits digital is now even shorter.
This can work out. Day and date releases are not good for the industry, not for us, and not for the studios.
Theater operators are doing everything they can to get moviegoers back to the cinema, but this day and age, they have to do a lot more than just the standard bag of popcorn.
Playback! Big chains say the cinema is now beyond just catching a flick, with many offering gourmet meals, alcohol, and 4D experiences.
We compete with restaurants, we compete with sport events, we compete with everything which is happening out of the house. Visiting the cinemas is still the most affordable entertainment that you can get.
For now, the holidays may have been the hero the big screen needed, but in the long run, theaters will have to save themselves.
I'm sorry, kid.
Steve Patterson, NBC News, Hollywood.
Christmas is come and gone, but a major gift is still up for grabs after nobody won the massive Powerball jackpot. The estimated jackpot has now climbed to $416 million. No one's claimed the top prize since October 4th. We've seen 34 consecutive drawings without a first prize winner, and the next drawing is tonight. So good luck. The royal family celebrated their first Christmas without Prince Philip this weekend. In her traditional Christmas message, the 95-year-old Queen touched on the loss while looking forward to the future. Here's NBC News foreign correspondent Kelly Kobiea.
Queen Elizabeth entering a new era this morning after celebrating the first Christmas without her husband, Prince Philip, but keeping spirits high during her holiday message.
And as much as I and my family miss him, I know he would want us to enjoy Christmas.
The Queen's plans scaled down, missing the traditional family church service and staying at her Windsor residence, where an intruder was arrested for breaching onto the castle grounds on Christmas Day. A 19-year-old caught by police within minutes, the Queen and guests undisturbed. The Cambridges hosting a Christmas carol with Kate playing the piano. And in California, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle sharing a candid holiday card with 2-year-old Archie and 6-month-old Lilibet Diana, her first public photo. The Queen now looking forward to better times and a milestone moment just months away, her Platinum Jubilee, a celebration of 70 years on the throne.
We are lucky enough to be able to witness and have a ringside seat to history in the making.
Elizabeth is the longest-serving monarch in British history, and at every jubilee, from silver in '77 to gold in 2002 and diamond nearly 10 years ago in 2012, Prince Philip was by her side. The Queen now facing this monumental milestone without him, along with worries about her own health, yet still determined to work, highlighting the upcoming celebrations in her Christmas message.
I hope will be an opportunity for people everywhere to enjoy a sense of togetherness.
The preparations already underway. Platinum Jubilee director Simon Brooks Ward sharing details of the main events next June.
We're walking along the mall. Obviously lots of traffic here right now. However, on the day,
there'll be flags, there'll be bunting, so the Queen will come out from Buckingham Palace behind and be escorted by the Household Cavalry Mounted Regiment. And this will be a huge, great sort of flow of military music, dancing, culture, everything. A real explosion of colour.
The crowning moment of every Jubilee before, the whole family on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, waving to a sea of cheering faces. With the Queen's health now in focus, the question, will the Jubilee celebrations bring the family together again?
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.